Welcome everyone to the WalkMassachusetts Network October meeting. So glad you're here. I'm going to turn it over to our speaker, Greiner from CultureHouse. Aaron, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Brendan, and hello everyone. Glad to have a chance to be presenting to you all today, and going to share a bit about my work at CultureHouse, and then we'll leave plenty of time for questions. So with that, I'm going to get into it. If you have questions on the way, feel free to put them in the chat as well. I can try to respond in real time, but also we should have plenty of time at the end. All right, let me get this started. All right. So give me a thumbs up if you can see. Great, awesome, thank you. So I'm going to be talking today about how CultureHouse creates walkable neighborhoods with social infrastructure, taking space from vacant to vibrant, and connecting that to concept of walkability in our neighborhoods. So I'm the director and founder of CultureHouse. And before we kind of get too much into the presentation, I want to first kind of level set with a term. So we talk about social infrastructure a lot. And if people have maybe just like in the chat, put in, when I say social infrastructure, what comes to mind? What spaces come to mind? What kind of ideas come to mind when you hear the word social infrastructure? Yeah, gathering spaces. I see parks, plazas. Yeah, absolutely. Open space, community space, coffee shops, squares, plazas, absolutely. So the definition that I like to use in talking about social infrastructure is one that was created by Eric Kleinenberg, sociologist who wrote a book that some of you may be familiar with called Houses for the People. And he defines them as the physical places and organizations that shape the way people interact. So we're really talking about a pretty broad definition of spaces that we go to meet other people, to form community. All right, with that kind of out of the way, really I kind of want to start with this, which is the idea for CultureHouse. Start with a question of what would it look like to open up a pop-up indoor public space? And so to kind of understand how we got to that question, I want to go back a little bit and tell you a bit about me. So we're going to go way back here. We don't go that far back, but a little bit further in the more recent past. Really, my work in this field started with my undergrad education at Olin College out in Needham, Massachusetts. I was working on kind of helping to improve gathering spaces in the university. And one of the first projects I worked on was this library here. This is the library, main library of the school. And looking at this photo, does anyone notice anything missing? Yeah, people. There's no people in this library. There was no reason to come here. It was basically an institutional relic. It was essentially unused. And so we took the opportunity to reimagine this library and thought, what if we took a people first approach to design this space? And we ended up with this space here. Now, actually, this photo is not full of people. Typically, there are people full in this library. It is full. They're often hidden behind these shelves, though. But you see a difference here, right? There's color here. These bookshelves are on wheels. We have things hanging from the ceiling. We have different kinds of seating. We have different opportunities to be able to kind of make the space their own. And so, really, this is a pretty quick transformation too. It wasn't expensive. It was pretty cheap, pretty quick. But it really transformed the use of the space, and it made it from a space that people avoided and no one was coming to or walking through, to a space that was actually an attraction. Another project to briefly mention was very formative for me was some work I did to help activate an underutilized space in one of the main buildings on the campus, where there's this kind of unused security desk. So another pretty dead area, essentially a lobby. And we decided to open up a pop-up coffee shop, open once a week, that would serve free coffee and tea to faculty, staff, and students. And immediately with that program in place, the whole space changed. It suddenly became this place of connection. People would connect with staff they never met before. people would be basically forming their entire day schedule around coming to our coffee shop. But really when we think about this in many ways, universities are a microcosm of cities. They're their own mini cities in many ways. And when we think about how do we create places that people can connect across difference, I think this is a great example of connection across kind of a third interest, right? This interest of like coming to drink some coffee. It attracts people and it helps create those connections across, in this case, what was kind of very disparate parts of the school population of faculty, staff, and students. Here's a fun little time lapse of what an average day looked like with slightly managed chaos, serving coffee to over 200 people in the span of an hour. Cool. So really my journey to this work was, I would say, boosted and amplified when I had a chance to study in Copenhagen. And anyone that's been there or studied there knows that it is a place that really has this dedication to public life and design of public life that is kind of unlike anything I had experienced before. And so that that was really a formative experience for me, looking at kind of the ways that we could actually take these kind of ideas that I have been thinking about in terms of coffee shops and libraries on a very small scale and apply them to much more of a city scale. I also had a chance to work with a group called Better Blocks, and you're familiar with them. They really focus on the streetscape side, but they also really have pioneered a lot of these kind of tactical urbanism methods. While a lot of the design I was studying in Copenhagen was beautiful and wonderful, a lot of it was quite large construction projects. And working with Better Block really showed me a lot of the ways that this work can be done actually quickly, cheaply, and beautifully. And still have actually like demonstrable effects that can really be impactful to a community. So all that kind of experience brought me to these two realizations, which was looking at kind of the greater Boston area, noticing this lack of public space, especially public space that are accessible year round. So when it's not that, those beautiful spring and summer days, if it's raining, if it's cold out, there's really a lack of truly publicly accessible space. At the same time, there's a real prevalence of empty storefronts, whether that's in spaces that are doing very economically well or spaces that are not. There is still a lot of empty space that could be potentially reused. And so that kind of really is where this question came from, which is what would a indoor public space look like in one of those vacant storefronts? So that's really how we came up with CultureHouse, and we kind of defined the organization and these kind of new idea of this pop-up public space as a living for the community, an urban design test kitchen, a third space, an indoor public park, and a host for regular programming. And so with that kind of definition done, we did a first pilot of this idea in Somerville and Union Square in 2018. And we transformed this underutilized lobby space in Bow Market, for those that are familiar, in Union Square, from what you see here into this. So really transformed the space, and with it, really transformed the use of the space. So we were open for just a month, but had over 50 events during those days we were open. Everything from ping pong tournaments, we have some ping pong tables upstairs, to meditation sessions, to live music. We did showings of the World Cup, which was going on that year, and that was some of our most popular events. And it really, we did this project as a real test. We said, we haven't really done this kind of work before. These kind of spaces are perhaps a new concept to a lot of people. And so we're very, very curious if people would react to it. And the reaction that we got, that is one that still drives me today, is people who would come in and say, I've always wanted a place like this. I just didn't know it could exist. And so with that, we set forth on thinking about how we could start to expand this model of these public spaces and expand our way of working. So I gave you enough history. Now on to the kind of the more fun current stuff. A lot has changed since 2018. But first you may be asking, okay, this is a a walking focused, walkability focused network here, why are we talking about public spaces? And really the reason is that in order for a community to be walkable, it must have robust social infrastructure. So we do a lot of research and work on what makes people want to actually go to a downtown area, what makes one to then stay there, and consistently find that there is this kind of dual draw in public spaces and in downtown areas. And the first element of that is the streets obviously quite important. You have to have a first level of safety, good sidewalks, obviously, but also what happens on the edges of those sidewalks is equally as important. We've actually done observations and studies where we find that in a downtown area, if we have one side of the street with more vacancies and one side of the street with more active uses, that we consistently see people choose to walk on the side of the street that has the activity. And yeah, right, Rachel said in the chat here, need somewhere worth walking to. Exactly. So not only should it be pleasant to walk, a pleasant walking experience, but also have a place to walk to. So we often find that having public spaces that have very low barrier to entry, where you don't have to buy anything to be there, where they're accessible year round, no matter the weather, can serve as a bit of an anchor for other local businesses, for other local attractions, and can give someone that reason to come downtown, that reason to actually walk there. And so, that is, I think, one of the biggest connections that we see between our work and walkability, but be happy to also in the Q&A to talk through a couple more important connections between social infrastructure and walkability. So our mission as an organization is to improve livability in local communities by transforming unused spaces into vibrant social infrastructure. So really, we are all about creating more healthy, vibrant, sustainable, equitable, and resilient cities through this transformation of unused space, and really serving, especially that question of the point of livability, in service of creating really vibrant, wonderful, livable places. So we work across 3 programs now. Our community pop-up program is really where we started. We still do these pop-up community spaces in vacant storefronts. And I'll talk through a couple project examples of that in just a moment. We do these kind of now all over Massachusetts. We also do more consulting style work. We do a lot of community engagement work with partners. We also do a lot of kind of tactical design build work. Here in this photo is a project we did, I'll talk about a bit later, but creating more outdoor gathering space using kind of pallets, cheap easy materials. And then we also have our test kitchen program. Unfortunately, we're typically not making actual food in the test kitchen, but as an organization that is really dedicated to open sourcing our ideas, dedicated to helping others learn from our progress and our process, we open source a lot of our work and additionally do a lot of just testing and really small scale prototyping in our test kitchen program as well. So across our work, we use a 5-step process, and we've really developed this over time as we have gone through many different kinds of projects, many different communities. So when we do our work, especially in that community pop-up program, we go through a 5-step process of first doing research, doing really in-depth community engagement, designing out and building spaces to test out ideas that we learned during the research and engagement phases. We operate those spaces, and then we collect lots of data, produce an impact report that in turn goes on to inform longer term processes. And this is, by design a loop, because in reality, this process is never done. The process of improving our built environment of our urban areas is never complete. And so we really view this as we are often involved in one cycle of this loop, but it should be a continual process of researching, engaging, testing, operating, and evaluating. So with that, I want to go through a couple specific projects that will highlight some of those areas and highlight some things that I talked about earlier. So the first one that I'll go through here is a pop-up we did in Kendall Square, CultureHouse Kendall. This was one of our earlier projects that we did, and we went into a vacant storefront, been vacant for over a year, and transformed it into this really vibrant pop-up community space. We were open for 9 months in this space, closed in March of 2020. But some of the really interesting impacts here were that if anyone is familiar with Kendall Square, you'll know that it is, I would say, not known for its vibrancy. It really has very much a 9 to 5 focus, and there is not as much activity on nights and weekends. And we really saw that when we kind of were doing observations before opening. And so we really focused on creating one activity and vibrancy on nights and weekends, but also really creating a better connection between surrounding neighborhoods. Kendall Square is very close to the port and East Cambridge, which are very diverse neighborhoods, racially, economically, but those communities had very little access to Kendall Square. So with that focus, we opened up this pop-up space, and I'll go through a couple quick impacts that we saw. One was that we saw actually an 8-fold increase in pedestrian traffic on the street on nights and weekends when we were open. And that was really because we provided that reason to come there, and that reason to actually stay there too. Really by returning the focus of this area into a place that was less about like, you have like thoroughput, you're here to work, and more of a place for that was really built by and for the community. We really, it was a big factor in seeing that increase in pedestrian traffic, which in turn can go to support other businesses in the area. We also saw in the space that was more diverse than actually the city of Cambridge as a whole, racially. So we saw over 50% BIPOC visitors in this space. And that is really the reason that we saw that is because we did really intentional programming. So we worked with a lot of local partners to bring events and programs to this space that actually represented communities that had not been represented in Kendall Square before. And so, really created a much better connection to the surrounding neighborhoods and created a much better sense of ownership and sense of belonging in Kendall Square. Great, another project, I mentioned this a bit earlier, but more on the kind of tactical intervention side, but still focused on public space. We did a project with the city of Somerville. This was installed in 2021 in the winter. This was a really COVID response project. The library was doing only contactless book pickup. The inside was not open, and so they couldn't offer internet access, which is a very critical thing that the library offered, and especially even more critical as everything was moving online. And so we built out a workspace with lights and covering for rain, outlets, Wi-Fi. Built this out in a matter of days on a pretty small budget. And we had heaters as well, and it was used throughout the winter, really well utilized. And really goes to show that a lot of our public spaces, with just some small tweaks to them, can be actually much more useful for many people. And the space was not used before, but again, with these small tweaks, with really observing what people wanted to use the space for and meeting a need, transformer quite quickly. I also want to briefly mention some of our more engagement focused work. So this is a project we did. A good question about the electricity. Yes, it did come from the library building. Yep, so they ran power out from the library building. We actually worked with a group that basically does like Wi-Fi boosting signals. So they were able to actually set up a transmitter in the library and then receive the Wi-Fi signal outside to help create a really strong signal outside the library as well. So this project is a photo from work we were doing with the Emerald Necklace Conservancy for their Olmsted Now celebration, which I'm guessing some people in this room are probably a part of. And they worked with us to engage community members on how they use the parks and how the parks can be improved. We're looking at questions of access to the park, questions of who has access to the park, questions of why do people not come to the park, why do they come to the park, how do they feel about parks. And so we used interactive methods of data collection. We didn't do a single survey. Instead, we had people come up and put stickers on giant boards. We had balls you could drop into different tubes to vote on ideas, giant chalkboards you could write on, really made it interactive. And it really changed people to interact with and give feedback. It really made it a much more fun and interesting experience. And we got that feedback from a lot of people. We had someone say, I've never had this much fun giving feedback on something before, which I think is a good sign. We are all asked, I think, quite often to fill out a survey, to, give feedback on a project. And there is, understandably some fatigue, engagement fatigue in that process too. So we really saw a very successful engagement with these, and we ended up finding some really interesting impacts, namely looking at which actually categorizing parks into parks that had a more regional draw versus neighborhood draw. And also looking at parks that people felt like they had good infrastructure in versus parks that didn't. And we were able to provide the Conservancy with some targeted ways that they could work to increase access to the Emerald Necklace Park system. So just a few more here, then I will wrap up and get to questions. This is one of our more recent projects that we did in East Somerville. This is a community pop-up space that we ran just this past spring. This project was really focused on creating more multilingual opportunities for the residents of East Somerville. There's a large Spanish and Portuguese speaking population in the area, but very few places for them to actually gather and form community. Additionally, we were looking at how to create more space for mothers and women. We noticed before we opened the pop-up that when we did observations on the street, that there were very few women walking on the street, likely tied to perceptions of safety in the area, and also tied to a lack of opportunities and things that were of interest to do in along Broadway in Somerville. So, with that focus, we opened up this space. It was open for just a month, quite a short pop-up, but really focused on creating a lot of multilingual programming, Spanish language programming, and also a lot of events focused on children, space for kids to play, and on mothers as well. We saw some pretty incredible impacts from this project. We saw a significant increase in women visiting the space compared to who we saw on the street before, indication of kind of reversing that. One, that sense of safety on the street by providing a lot of transparency and light into the space, helping it create a more safe environment on the sidewalk, and additionally providing more opportunities for mothers and children to be together in the same room doing different activities. We also saw a lot of really good engagement with Spanish, especially with Spanish-speaking residents and neighbors. Our manager in this space spoke English, Spanish, and Portuguese, which is a really important factor in creating kind of a very accessible destination for people. Additionally, this project had a lot of connection really to the street as a whole. And we did see that with kind of more intentional activation of this facade and of this storefront, and with this kind of destination, that we attracted a lot of people that walked. Walking was our most common mode of transportation to get to this space. If anyone's familiar with this area of East Somerville, you'll know that it is right next to the corridor of death, one of the most dangerous places to walk in the area. It is cut off by highways, and in general doesn't have a great walking experience to get here. Despite that, we did see walking as a really important mode of transportation in this space, even given that the roadway and a lot of the areas around it are very much auto-oriented. So that was interesting because, of course, we heard a lot from businesses that parking was the biggest issue. And so being able to provide some data to say that actually, most of that came to this space walked here, provided some good information as the Main Streets organization we worked with, and as the city thinks about ways to improve this area of East Somerville. So the last project that I will mention here is an in-progress work, but relates a lot to, I think, a lot of the work that people in this room are working on, so I want to mention it, which is we are working with the city of Somerville and Neighborways Design on installing some slow street neighborways in Somerville. So Somerville already has a network of slow streets, but we are trying to revamp that, make them bigger, bolder, better, as part of the city's bike network plan. But in that as well, looking at opportunities for improving the pedestrian and rolling experience on the street, in addition to improving access for those on bikes. So we actually are just wrapping up our first round of engagement right now. And I've been doing observations on the street and have been using different methods to evaluate pedestrian conditions and current bike conditions as well. Yes, it is Pearl Street. Somerville. So we are just off Pearl Street here. The project is primarily on Glen Street, and Pearl intersects right with it. So it's also the site of some recent traffic calming work from the city, including these neighborhood traffic circles. One very interesting thing we've already heard in the engagement and the feedback so far is that they're having these new traffic circles installed as a traffic calming measure. And people are very confused about them. When we go door to door, people are like, I don't know what they are, I don't know what they do. And something that we are actually going to be prioritizing in our installation of this street is information. And when we think about, we are hopefully making streets that are safer, but sometimes those changes aren't always obvious. Maybe if you're in a planning field or in a design field, you might know the connection between a neighborhood traffic circle and slower vehicle speeds, but that might not always be an obvious connection. And so we are likely planning to include some sort of temporary signage when we install the low traffic street next spring. That will be up for a period of months to explain what's going on, or perhaps doing this through pamphlets we leave on doors. Still deciding that, but really trying to actually give people an explanation of why are these changes happening and how did it actually benefit the things that they said they were looking for. And I think we've always found that time and time again that when we talk to people and then we implement a project, being able to really show the connection between the issues that they told us and the design that's been implemented is a very critical way to actually help people be excited and supportive of it and create more goodwill and opportunity for further development down the road. So with that, I want to just go through a couple top level impacts in the organization. So of course, in our work, we see really specific impacts in every project, and we do document those, and those are quite specific to each community and each situation, but also we start to look across our various different projects and we see some commonalities in the impact that they have on the communities. So the first is around building crisis resilience. So this goes to that piece of social infrastructure that I talked about earlier. Research shows this, and this is backed up by our own research as well, that in a time of crisis, when communities have more connections, when people know each other, that they fare better. And that's because when you know your neighbor, if there's a heat wave, for instance, you might know, oh, I have a neighbor that doesn't have AC or that's older, I'm going to check in on them. And literally it's documented that there is higher mortality rates during crisis. That research goes on to say that those connections form in public spaces. So that social infrastructure is actually the catalyst for creating those community connections that in turn build that resilience to crisis. So when we think about, why do we want walkable communities? Why do we want vibrant downtowns? I think a really important reason is that we want to be building those neighborhood connections, because they literally can be the difference between life and death. The second is livable communities. So we in our work really focus on play, on vibrancy, on visual stimulation. And again, research, both our own and external research, shows that when we have more vibrant places, I like to call them sticky places you actually want to go and stay. Not only does that create better economic outcomes, it makes some people likely to walk downtown, it also literally increases happiness. As we have increasing loneliness epidemics in the country, there's been a lot more research and writing, and the Surgeon General even issued, a state of emergency essentially around loneliness recently. Really a key antidote to that is centering livability in the conversation around how we create our downtowns. And then lastly is equitable community development. So in a lot of very traditional models of development, we can lead to a negative feedback loop of things happening to communities, which can lead to displacement and gentrification. Instead, our work focuses on flipping that on its head and communities to be the self-determiners of their own future. And so that really, the engagement process that we work on is designed to actually have communities be the ones that self-determine their own future, and in turn can create a positive feedback loop where communities can actually create investment and can benefit from that investment. So that's been also another key impact across our work. So I just want to kind of end with thinking about, what is the future of this work? And we really see CultureHouse and work we do as a model. We developed systems and structures for engagement, for testing out ideas, for creating public spaces, for evaluating those spaces, for running those spaces. And our goal is we really have this vision of this network of public space that exists across communities, across Massachusetts, across the US, across the world, where we have this social infrastructure as an anchor to healthy, livable, walkable communities. And with that, I did want to give a quick plug, which is that we are opening up our next pop-up space in Union Square in Somerville in January 2024. So if anyone's in the area, anyone lives nearby or travels or works nearby, keep an eye on our website. We will also be releasing more information soon, but there's opportunities to get involved in that, filling out our community survey. We'll be doing some community meetings coming up. We're talking to people a lot about the project. And then, of course, once it opens, there'll be a lot of opportunities to actually come and experience the space and experience exactly what we're talking about. This particular project is really coming out of a desire, as the Union Square goes through changes with new development, a really strong desire from the community to create more space for intentional gathering, both to welcome in new residents and also, to make sure that we connect and retain the things that we love about the square. So there will be, it's Gracia, come for your birthday. We'll see you there. So that'll be a really fun project, and look forward to seeing that wants to visit and see our work in action. It's a great chance to do it. So I will leave you all with this, which is, in our work, we often ask communities what they wish they had a place to do. So I would implore you, kind of as you go about the rest of your day, after this call ends, think about what you wish you had a place to do. And then let's work together to make that place happen. So with that, I will stop. Thank you all for listening, for going through all those many slides, and I will turn it over for some questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Aaron. I am going to stop the recording and we'll go to questions. Thanks.
Great.